Okay, good morning and welcome, folks. Continue with our Maimer Rabim, how to deal with the flow that goes through our head, the stream of consciousness, in the challenge and the difficulty of making a livelihood. And in this Maimer, the Rebbe explains that making a livelihood is really, and the challenge rather in it, the difficulties, the painstaking effort, and that our minds can, be so totally engaged that we lose ourselves, is actually a favor from God to bring out something deeper in us. And that depth is the idea of tshuva, meaning, um, the soul in its natural habitat is bound up in one with God and is righteous. When it comes into a body, comes into this material world, it's got to find its way. So you would think, and some people, feel that way. Well, just sit and learn Torah a whole day and, daven a whole day and just engage in mitzvahs of holiness. And then God throws you a curveball that hey, got to make a living. And that's a challenge. How to not get drowned, my Rabim, right, with the turbulent waters. So in the end, we can never get drowned because the Jewish soul is always connected. But that's the way it is in deep down. And what we have to do is bring the depth of that connection and return it to Hashem in actuality. Um, so not only is there a natural habitat of love in the habitat, there's a love that the soul has for Hashem and wants to be bound up, but going through the challenge and difficulty actually brings out a greater love than it naturally has. That's the idea of Baal Tshuva, that a completely righteous person can't stand in the place of the Baal Tshuva. Because through tshuva, we don't just come back to our original place, right? Because the original place of our connection with God is a righteous connection that the soul has, but we come to a greater place. So it can only be by coming down in this world that we can achieve that. Now, let's understand this further. This is quite abstract. I don't know, perhaps I guess the word abstract might be the right word. And challenging idea. Now, how do we say that we become more connected? How do we understand that when the root source of the soul is in Atzmos, the essence of God that's beyond any revelation? Right. In other words, revelation, there's degrees. So like there's degrees of kindness, but that's not only in how we express and reveal kindness. The core essence of the soul, the way it's rooted in God, that kindness, well, so to speak, there aren't levels. So how do we achieve something greater here, um, that in a connection with Hashem, with God, then the nature of the soul, the way it was before it came into this world, was already bound up to the core essence of God beyond any revelation. As is understood from the fact that our sages say that before God created the world, who did he take advice in? Well, it was in these very souls that we're talking about. Right. In other, it's saying that there's already that connection with the core essence of the soul before this, before anything. And before anything of creation. Who did God take advice in? Is in these very souls that are righteous souls. And in taking the advice, took advice in the most lofty levels of revelation. You know, uh, so from this, it's understood that the neshamas, the souls, are beyond any level of revelation. Again, revelation means the way something is revealed. There can be very, different levels. So on the level of revelation, you could say, oh, there's higher, lower. But the soul that God engaged before creation, before anything, right? To, as it were, take advice in, just shows on that the connection of the soul is to the core essence of God. Nonetheless, right? So the point, again, the simple point over here, trying to bring out, is that there is already the core essence of the soul is connected with the core essence of God. And what are we accomplishing now that's more? In other words, to say, and this is what's important, and this notion is very important for us to appreciate. To say that we're going back to the same place that we were, okay, as the soul was before it came down, and we're just recreating that reality, that connection, fine. That's not what we're saying. The Rebbe is not saying that. He's saying we're creating a greater connection to God through the trials and tribulations of making a livelihood, that through that we have to return ourselves. And we're not returning ourselves to what was, we're returning to ourselves to what's greater than was. Well, how do you get greater than, being connected to the core essence of God? Right? What's more than that? Nonetheless, it's still possible to say, based on what we just said, that through tshuva, which tshuva, penitence, return, and doesn't mean return because of sin, it means return because there's a distance. And just as we all probably experience when you're making a livelihood, there can be very much a sense of distance from God because you're kind of sunk in the material world. And we're saying this, so you have to return from there. Now we get, that's the idea of tshuva over here. So we make a greater aliyah, even a greater ascent, even than where the soul came from. I mentioned this in previous class. This parallels the idea that what we're doing in the world today, right, is not to get us back to Gan Eden, which is unique over every other, religion. And even in Jewish teachings, you can get the notion, that the soul should go back to Gan Eden and be connected to Hashem as it was originally. No, it's going to be a greater connection. So we need to understand, how is it a greater connection? If the soul originally was, before anything was created, the soul was there, kind of with God, if you will, guiding, God in creation. But yes, through the tshuva that we do, we come even to a greater ascent than we were with the soul as it was originally rooted in God. So this be understood by what the Magid, the Alter Rebbe's Rebbe, successor of the Baal Shem Tov, in that which our sages say, that Yisrael Olam HaMachshava, that the Jewish soul came up in God's thought. What does that mean? I mean, in other words, its root source is in thought as opposed to speech. Everything else God created, He created through speech. The soul comes from a deeper place, thought. Right. So this is like a metaphor he gives of an individual. And he has a son. The father has a son. Now, even though the father who has a son, the son, left him. I mean, just, isn't with him at the moment, shall we say, right? It's a metaphor. Nonetheless, he left. He went on his world tour, whatever it is, right? And nonetheless, it is engraved in his mind of the father, the image of his son, right? It's there. Now, when it comes to a human being, as far as the metaphor, right, this is only someone who, in fact, has a son, right? So it'll be engraved in your mind, the image of your son, even though he went on a world tour. He's gone for a while, whatever the case may be. That's only when you have, right? Now, by God. We can't say that the image of the Jew is engraved in God's mind. Remember, because we're saying that the Jewish soul was Allah b'machshava, came up in thought. So he's explaining what this means, right? When God, the thought of us came up in his mind, since there's no past, present, and future by God, so we are engraved in him, right? And that engraving just showing about, the point over here is just showing how essentially we're bound up with God, right? And what it means to be in the thought of God, that's where the soul comes from. Again, as opposed to all of creation comes from speech. Speech is not something engraved, often we say things just, it's easy to say, it's easy to talk. But when you have in your head something that is engraved in your head, that's a much deeper and profound connection. And that's what we're talking about. So in the metaphor, the father it's engraved in his mind because he has a son. Well, God, even before he has us, since past, present, and future, he is beyond. He's not limited to. So therefore, the fact that we are engraved, as it were, in his thoughts. right? Even though we're not even created yet. So from this, we can understand what it means, that the soul is rooted in the core essence of God. And as a result of that, that's why God took consultation, as it were, right? Even though in actuality, well, I'd say, I don't know if actuality is the right word, but at least in our limited perspective of past, present, and future, we are not. So from this, we can understand that the fact that the soul is rooted in the core essence of God, right? This is the neshama, the way it is as a created being, right? Even as it is something that came down into this world. So, and only that at that point, the soul is engraved in the divine thought. And the reason why it's engraved in the divine thought is only because for God, there's nothing of the past. There's nothing of the future. It all is. And as is known in the idea of the God taking advice from souls, what, right? This came before God that he would have pleasure from from the soul in its divine service that it does here, down here below, even though in our perspective, we didn't come back. We didn't come here yet. But for God, there is no past, present, and future, that a limitation. So he's having the pleasure thereof, of the fact that, and therefore takes advice in the soul before creation, already, shall we say, in a sense, experiencing that pleasure. Now, so it's like we can't get that because we can only experience the pleasure, only experience the pleasure of the coffee when you actually had it. So God's having the pleasure, even though we're not, that soul wasn't yet, in our perspective, down here doing that divine act, that mitzvah. Right? I hope I'm clear on that. So according to this, we can now understand the exaltedness that's done by the neshama when it actually does come down. Even though we are already rooted in the core essence of God, we're already there. As we explained, right? God even takes advice in everything that he's going to manifest in creation with the soul, because the soul is there before anything is manifest, already connected. And that's only because God has full awareness already of what's going to be when we do come down here, and that we're going to fulfill the ultimate intent in divine service. So he knows that already. So he's already having the pleasure. Now, even though that also in the beginning, God is fully aware and complete full awareness and no question about it that we're going to fulfill the mandate for what we were created for. We're going to actually do that mitzvah. But that's only in potential. The ultimate evolvement, the ultimate exaltedness, the ultimate intent is in actuality. And this is what the exactness in the language of who does God take advice from the souls of the righteous. In other words, talking here about advice, Well, advice is only a potential of something, right? When you take advice in somebody, it's, giving you the power then to actualize what you need to actualize. But in fact, it's only a potential state, right? So yeah, this is what we did. We gave advice, potential, right? That the intent will be realized. And well, that's the level of the soul as it is. But after we come down into this world and we actually fulfill, we actually came to learn now. God knows that today, before we came to learn, we're going to learn. You already knew that. Already aware of it. Already even had the pleasure of it. Because there was no past, present, and future. But that was only in potentially, but in fact that we're here and we are in fact learning, right? So that potential, therefore, that we were on the level of tzaddikim, of the righteous. But when after we come down into this world, a soul and a body, dealing with what we got to deal with, that we actually fulfill the intent in actuality, then we become Bal Tshuva. Thank you for all being here. So I definitely got more of a understanding of this because I had to say it in actuality rather than in potential the way it was in my head. And that for me is actually, yeah, I kind of had it when it was swimming in my head, but I understand it much more now that I'm not drowning in it. That I actually expressed it verbally and there's more clarity. But more on this to come. Today's learning in honor of Shayahu ben ooh, forgot the father's name. Liba and Davida's father. She's sitting Shiva. Reach out to her and to
Yeshayahu, and then there's Bezalel.
it's hollow. Yes, Yeshua ben, but thank you. Oh, and we welcome Sarah Malka. Wow.
Thank you.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. All right, folks, we'll see you